Captain Lee Tae-min stared at the stars through the main viewing window of the UES Horizon's Edge. The ship moved silently through space near the Kepler 442 system. This was supposed to be a simple patrol mission: find new worlds, look for resources, make sure Earth was safe. Tae-min had been in space for 5 years now. He loved his job. He loved his crew. Most of all, he loved the feeling that they were making history. Humans had only been traveling between stars for 20 years. Every mission still felt like an adventure. "Captain," called Lieutenant Park Ji-ho from his station, "I'm getting some strange readings on long-range sensors." Tae-min walked over to Ji-ho's console. The two men had been friends since military academy. Ji-ho was the best sensor operator in the fleet. If he said something was strange, it was worth checking. "What kind of readings?" Tae-min asked. "Energy signatures I've never seen before. Multiple contacts, big ones." Ji-ho's fingers moved quickly over his controls. "Captain, these ships are huge. Much bigger than anything we've built." Communications Officer Kim So-ra looked up from her station. "Sir, should I try to make contact?" Tae-min thought for a moment. First contact with alien life was always possible, but no one really expected it to happen. Earth scientists had been looking for alien signals for decades. They had found nothing. "Try to contact them," Tae-min decided. "But keep weapons ready just in case." So-ra began broadcasting on all frequencies. "Unknown vessels, this is Captain Lee Tae-min of the United Earthship Horizon's Edge. Please respond." The response came faster than anyone expected, but it wasn't words. It was weapons fire. Red energy beams cut through space toward the horizon's edge. Tae-min felt the ship shake as the shots missed by only a few hundred meters. "Battle stations!" Tae-min shouted. Alarms began ringing throughout the ship. "Ji-ho, how many ships are out there?" 12 confirmed contacts, sir. Maybe more coming out of hyperspace." The viewing screen lit up as the alien ships became visible. They were dark and angular, covered in spikes and weapon pods. They looked like they were built for war and nothing else. "So-ra, send an emergency message to Earth," Tae-min ordered. "Tell them we've made contact with hostile aliens. Give them our position and all sensor data." "Message sent, sir," So-ra replied quickly. The Horizon's Edge was an exploration ship, not a warship. It had some weapons, but nothing compared to what was attacking them. Tae-min knew they were in serious trouble. Evasive. "Maneuvers," he called to the pilot. "Try to keep us alive long enough to learn something about these ships." The next few minutes were chaos. The alien ships moved like nothing human pilots had ever seen. They were fast and coordinated. Their weapons were incredibly powerful. Each shot that hit the Horizon's Edge caused massive damage. "Hull breach on Deck 3, reported the damage control officer. "Emergency bulkheads are holding. Weapons are offline," called the weapons officer. "Primary power is failing." Tae-min gripped his command chair as another blast shook the ship. Through the smoke and flashing lights, he could see his crew working desperately to keep them alive. These were good people. The best Earth had to offer. They didn't deserve to die in the cold darkness of space. "Captain," Ji-ho said quietly, "I'm reading massive energy buildup in the lead alien ship. I think they're preparing to finish us." Tae-min looked around his bridge. So-ra was still trying to boost their distress signal. Ji-ho was recording everything their sensors could detect about the alien ships. Even facing death, his crew was doing their duty. "Dr. Choi," Tae-min spoke to the ship's AI system. The voice belonged to Dr. Choi Hae-won back on Earth, who had programmed the computer. "Yes, Captain," the AI responded in Dr. Choi's calm voice. "Record everything. Make sure this data gets back to Earth somehow. Humanity needs to know what's coming." "Data recorded and transmitted, Captain. It has been an honor serving with you." The final blast came from the alien flagship. It struck the Horizon's Edge directly in the engine section. The ship's lights went out. The artificial gravity failed. In the sudden silence, Tae-min could hear only the sound of escaping air and distant explosions. "Abandon ship," he ordered. "All hands to escape pods." But there was no time. Secondary explosions were already tearing through the ship. Tae-min felt himself thrown against a bulkhead as another blast shook what was left of the Horizon's Edge. The last thing he saw was Ji-ho and So-ra at their stations, still working even as the bridge filled with smoke and flame. They were heroes, They all were. Then everything went black. Taemin woke up in pain. His head was pounding and his vision was blurry. He was lying on a metal floor in what looked like a prison cell. The walls were covered with strange writing in a language he had never seen. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. His left arm was broken and his ribs hurt with every breath. But he was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. The cell was small and dirty. There was a metal bench built into one wall and a hole in the floor that was probably a toilet. A single light panel in the ceiling provided dim illumination. Heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside his cell. Taemin forced himself to stand, using the wall for support. He needed to see his captors. The creature that appeared at his cell door was like nothing from Earth. It stood over 2 meters tall and was covered in dark scales. Its eyes were yellow and cold. When it spoke, its voice was deep and harsh. Taemin couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. He was a prisoner. His ship was destroyed. His crew was dead. The alien turned and walked away without another word. Taemin was alone. He sat back down on the bench and tried to think. The pain in his head made it difficult, but he forced himself to focus. He was Captain Lee Taemin of the United Earth Navy. He had a duty to survive and return home with information about these aliens. But first, he had to figure out where he was and what his captors wanted. Hours passed, or maybe days. It was hard to tell in the windowless cell. Eventually, more aliens came. They grabbed Taemin roughly and dragged him through corridors filled with other prisoners. He saw creatures he couldn't have imagined. Some looked like giant insects. Others were covered in fur or had multiple arms. All of them looked beaten and afraid. The aliens threw him into a larger cell with about 20 other prisoners. None of them were human. Taemin was completely alone among hostile aliens on an unknown world, with no way to contact Earth. As he looked around at his fellow prisoners, Taemin made a silent promise. He would survive this. He would learn about these aliens and their technology. And someday, somehow, he would return to warn Earth about what was coming. He had no idea that it would take 10 years, or that when he finally returned home, he would bring an army with him. The prison transport ship smelled like fear and death. Taemin sat chained to a wall with dozens of other prisoners. He had been on the ship for what felt like weeks, though it was hard to tell time without windows or clocks. His cellmates came from different worlds across the galaxy. There were the Kalani, who looked like walking bears with 4 arms. The Nefri were thin and tall with large eyes and pale skin. The Zephi had smooth heads and moved without making any sound. None of them spoke to Taemin. When he tried to communicate, they either ignored him or made sounds that seemed like laughter. He was starting to understand that humans had a very bad reputation in this part of the galaxy. One of the Kalani prisoners, who had scars covering his arms, finally spoke to him in broken English. "You are human, yes?" the Kalani asked. "We heard about your kind. Weak, soft, die quickly in prison." "I'm still alive," Taemin replied. The Kalani made a sound that was definitely laughter. "Prison ship is easy. Wait until you see Kethmore. Then we see how long human lasts." Kethmore turned out to be a planet that looked like hell. The sky was always dark red, and the air tasted like metal. There were no trees or grass, just rocks and dust. The prison was built into the side of a mountain, with thousands of cells carved into the stone. The guards were Vorthak, the same species, that had destroyed the horizon's edge. They were bigger than Taemin had realized, and they carried weapons that could kill with a single shot. When they spoke, it sounded like rocks grinding together. Taemin was thrown into a cell with 5 other prisoners. There was a Kalani warrior named Kral, a Nefri engineer called Vix, a Zephi mystic who never gave his name, and 2 others from species Taemin didn't recognize. The cell was barely large enough for 6 beings. There were no beds, just a pile of rags in one corner. Food came once a day through a slot in the door. It was usually some kind of gray paste that tasted terrible but kept them alive. "Humans should sleep near door," Kral said on the first night. "When guards come for someone, they take whoever is closest." "Why would you help me?" Taemin asked. "Not helping. Just want to see how long you last. Never seen human before. The first month was the hardest. Taemin was weak from his injuries and still adjusting to the planet's strange atmosphere. The other prisoners treated him like he was already dead. Even his cellmates ignored him most of the time. But Taemin had survived military training and 5 years in space. He knew how to stay alive when things got bad. He watched and learned. He figured out which guards were cruel and which ones just did their jobs. He learned when to stay quiet and when to speak up. Most importantly, he started learning languages. The Kalani language was full of growls and hard sounds. Nefri sounded like singing. HFY was mostly mental, but they made soft clicking noises when they had to speak out loud. Taemin practiced every day, listening to conversations and trying to understand. After 3 months, he could follow basic conversations. After 6 months, he could speak enough to make himself understood. The other prisoners started looking at him differently. Most species give up learning languages after few words, Vix told him one day. Too hard. You keep trying. I need to understand what's happening around me, Taemin explained. Information keeps me alive. Vix made a sound that was the Nefri version of laughter. Smart for human. Maybe you live longer than I thought. The real test came during Taemin's 7th month on Kethmore. A new group of prisoners arrived, including a young Nefri who couldn't have been more than a child. The kid was scared and crying, calling for his parents. One of the Vorthak guards thought this was funny. He grabbed the young Nefri and started, hitting him while laughing. The other prisoners watched but did nothing. This was normal on Kethmore. The strong survived and the weak died, but Taemin couldn't watch a child get beaten to death. He stood up and walked toward the guard. Everyone in the prison yard stopped what they were doing. A human was about to challenge a Vorthak. This was either very brave or very stupid. Let the kid go, Taemin said in the Vorthak language. He had been learning it by listening to the guards. The guard dropped the young Nefri and stared at Taemin. Human speaks Vorthak? Interesting. You want to take punishment instead? Yeah, I do. The beating that followed was brutal. The Vorthak guard had weapons and armor. Taemin had nothing but his hands and his training. He lasted longer than anyone expected. But in the end, he was just a human fighting a professional soldier. When it was over, Taemin was unconscious and bleeding. The young Nefri was alive and unharmed. He woke up 3 days later in the prison, medical bay. Vix was sitting next to his bed. Why did you do that? The Nefri engineer asked. Child was not your species, not your responsibility. Where I come from, adults protect children, Taemin said. His voice was hoarse and his throat hurt. Doesn't matter what species they are. Word of what Taemin had done spread through the prison. The Kalani warriors started talking to him with respect instead of amusement. The Nefri began sharing technical knowledge with him. Even the mysterious HFY started including him in their mental communications. For the first time. Since arriving on Kethmore, Taemin wasn't alone. Kral visited him while he was recovering. You fought badly, the Kalani warrior said. No technique, no strategy, but you fought anyway. That takes courage. I couldn't just watch, Taemin replied. Most beings can. Most beings do. You are different. Kral paused. I will teach you to fight properly. If you are going to be stupid and challenge guards, you should at least know how to hit them. Training with Kral was painful, but Taemin learned quickly. Human bodies were weaker than Kalani, but they were more flexible. Taemin couldn't overpower a Vorthak guard, but he could be faster and smarter. Vix taught him about Nefri technology. The pale engineer was fascinated by human problem-solving methods. Your species thinks differently, Vix explained. You see, solutions we miss. The unnamed HFY mystic taught him meditation techniques. Your mind is loud and chaotic, the mystic said without moving his lips. The words appeared directly in Taemin's thoughts. But it is also creative. We will teach you to focus this creativity. As the months passed, Taemin became something unique on Kethmore. He was a human who could speak multiple alien languages, fight like a Kalani warrior, think like a Nefri engineer, and communicate like a HFY mystic. More importantly, he was someone the other prisoners trusted. When disputes broke out between different species groups, they came to Taemin to settle them. When new prisoners arrived scared and confused, he helped them understand the rules. When guards were particularly cruel, he organized quiet resistance. 2 years after arriving on Kethmore, Taman realized something important. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something. The prisoners were starting to work together, in ways they never had before. Kral mentioned it one evening as they shared their daily ration of gray paste. Prison is different now. Less fighting between species. More cooperation. People are the same everywhere, Taman said. They just need someone to remind them what they have in common. What do Kalani warriors have in common with Nefri engineers? Kral asked. Taman smiled. They both hate being in prison. It was a simple answer, but it was true. The Vorthak had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved millions of beings. Every prisoner on Kethmore had lost everything to the same enemy. That was something they could all understand. As his 3rd year on the prison planet began, Taman started thinking about bigger questions, like how many prisoners were on Kethmore, how the guards were organized, how supplies arrived and where they came from. He was still planning to escape someday and return to Worn Earth, but now he was starting to think he might not have to go home alone. 5 years had passed since Taman arrived on Kethmore. The scared human who had watched a child get beaten was gone. In his place was someone harder, smarter, and more dangerous. He had learned to speak 7 different alien languages fluently. His body was covered in scars from fights with guards and other prisoners, but he was stronger than he had ever been on Earth. Most importantly, he had earned something precious on a planet where nothing was free. Respect. The network had started. Small. Just Taman and his cellmates sharing information about guard schedules and safe places to hide extra food. But it had grown into something much bigger. Prisoners from different species worked together now. Kalani warriors provided muscle when needed. Nefri engineers found ways to disable security systems. HFY mystics used their mental abilities to coordinate activities across the prison. Other species contributed their own unique skills. At the center of it all was Taman, translating between groups that had never cooperated before. Human thinks too much, Kral complained during one of their planning meetings. The Kalani warrior had become Taman's closest friend, though he would never admit it. Always making complicated plans when simple fight would work better. Simple fights get people killed, Taman replied. Complicated plans keep people alive, long enough to win. They were hiding in an abandoned section of the prison, discussing their latest operation. The Vorthak had been moving prisoners to different sections, breaking up established groups. Taman suspected they were starting to notice the increased cooperation among the inmates. Vix looked up from the stolen datapad he was examining. Security sweeps have increased 30% in the last month. They know something is happening. The unnamed HFY mystics spoke directly into their minds. The guards are afraid. They do not understand what they are seeing. Good, Taman said. Fear makes people make mistakes. We can use that. But their small acts of sabotage and resistance were about to become something much bigger. That afternoon, a new group of prisoners arrived on a transport ship. Among them was a Nefri engineer named Yara, who brought news that changed everything. The Vorthak Empire is preparing for a major expansion, Yara told them during the evening. Meal. They have found new star systems to conquer, rich systems with advanced technology. How do you know this? Taman asked. I worked on their ships before being arrested for sabotage. The new targets include a system the Vorthak call Sol 3. I think that is your home system, human. Taman felt cold. Sol 3 was definitely Earth's solar system. After 5 years, the HFY War was finally coming to his home. When? He asked quietly. Soon, maybe 2 years, 3 at most. They are building a massive fleet. That night, Taman couldn't sleep. He walked the corridors of the prison, thinking about his old crew. Park Ji-ho and Kim So-ra were probably dead by now, killed in the early skirmishes of a war Earth didn't even know was coming. Or maybe they were still alive, still serving on ships that would be destroyed like the Horizon's Edge. Earth's navy was advanced by human standards, but compared to the Vorthak Empire, they were children with toys. The next morning, Taman called a meeting of all the cell leaders in his network. There were representatives from 6 different species, some of whom had been enemies before the prison brought them together. "We need to change our goals," he told them. "Small sabotage isn't enough anymore. We need to think bigger." "What do you propose?" asked Mora, an insect-like creature from the hive worlds. "We take over the prison, completely, and then we steal some ships." The silence that followed was broken by Kral's booming laughter. "Human has finally gone insane. Good. Insane plans are sometimes best plans." But Vix was shaking his head. "Impossible. There are 50,000 prisoners on Kethmore, maybe 5,000 guards. But guards have weapons, armor, air support. We have nothing." "We have something they don't," Taemin said. "We work together. They don't expect that." Over the next few months, Taemin's network grew into something that resembled a real military organization. Different species groups took on specialized roles based on their natural abilities. The Kalani became shock troops, training for direct combat. The Nefri focused on technical sabotage and intelligence gathering. The HFY provided communication and coordination. Smaller species groups found their own niches. Some became scouts, others worked on supply chains. Taemin found himself doing something he had never expected: commanding an alien army. The planning took 2 years. They had to learn guard rotations, map every corridor and ventilation shaft, figure out where weapons were stored, and identify which prisoners could be trusted with the truth about their plans. Most challenging of all, they had to do this while making it look like nothing had changed. The Vorthak guards couldn't suspect that the prisoners were preparing for war. Taemin applied everything he had learned in human military academies, combined with tactics he had picked up from his alien allies. Kalani preferred direct assault. Nefri liked subtle infiltration. HFY used misdirection and psychological warfare. Human tactics involved all of these approaches working together. "Your species thinks strangely," Vix observed during one planning session. "Most species specialize. Kalani fight, Nefri build, HFY think. Humans do everything badly." "Maybe," Taemin said. "But we do everything. That makes us unpredictable." The breakthrough came when Yara and 2 other Nefri engineers managed to hack into the prison's communication system. For the first time, they could see the bigger picture of what the Vorthak Empire was doing. The news was worse than Taemin had feared. The Empire wasn't just preparing to attack Earth, they were getting ready to launch attacks on dozens of systems, simultaneously. It was going to be the largest military campaign in galactic history. But the communication hack also revealed something else. Kethmore wasn't just a prison. It was a staging area. The planet was home to a major Vorthak fleet, including troop transports, battleships, and supply vessels. "If we could capture even a few of those ships," Taemin said to his inner circle, "we could warn the worlds that are about to be attacked." "And how do we capture Vorthak warships with prison spoons and stolen tools?" Kral asked. "The same way we're going to capture the prison," Taemin replied, "by being smarter than they expect us to be." The final piece of the plan fell into place when they learned about the guard rotation schedule. Once every 6 months, most of the Vorthak garrison was rotated off-world for other assignments. For exactly 72 hours, Kethmore would be defended by a skeleton crew. That was their window. Taemin gathered his core team in their hidden meeting place one last time. Looking around at the assembled aliens, Kalani warriors, Nefri engineers, HFY mystics, and others, he felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving Earth. He felt like he was part of a crew again. "Tomorrow, we take back our freedom," he told them. "Some of us won't survive, but those who do will have the chance to save billions of lives across the galaxy." Kral slammed his 4 fists together in the Kalani salute. "Finally, a battle worth fighting." Vix activated the modified communication device they had built from stolen parts. "All teams, prepare for Operation Liberation." "The HFY mystics," voice echoed in everyone's minds. "For too long, we have been prisoners. Tomorrow, we become soldiers." As his allies dispersed to make final preparations, Taemin allowed himself to think about Earth one more time. Somewhere out there, Park Ji-ho might still be alive. Dr. Choi Hai-wan might still be working on new technologies. Earth might still be free. In less than 24 hours, he would either be dead or on his way home with an army at his back. Either way, his 10-year imprisonment was about to end. The alarm bells started ringing at exactly 0300 hours ship time. By then, Taemin and his teams had already been moving for 30 minutes. 10 years of planning, preparation, and building trust across species lines came together in a single night. The liberation of Kethmore began not with a massive assault, but with silence. HFY mystics used their mental abilities to confuse the guard tower's sensor operators. Nefri engineers cut power to entire sections of the prison. Kalani warriors moved through the darkness like four-armed shadows, taking out isolated guards before they could raise an alarm. Taemin led the central assault team toward the prison's main armory. His team included members from 5 different species, all moving together with the coordination of a military unit, which, after years of training, was exactly what they had become. First checkpoint clear, VIX reported through their stolen communication devices. Security grid is down for 90 seconds. They had practiced this approach hundreds of times using maps drawn from memory and stolen blueprints. Every step was planned, every timing calculated. But Taemin knew that no plan survived contact with the enemy. Soon, they would have to improvise. The armory was guarded by 6 Vorthak soldiers. Under normal circumstances, that would have been enough to stop any prison riot. But these weren't normal circumstances, and this wasn't a riot. Kral and 2 other Kalani warriors attacked from the front, their 4 arms making them devastating fighters in close combat. At the same time, Nefri engineers disabled the guards' weapon systems using devices built from scavenged parts. The HFY mystic projected confusion and fear directly into the guards' minds, while Taemin coordinated the assault using hand, signals, and whispered commands in multiple languages. The entire fight lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, 6 Vorthak guards were unconscious, and Taemin's team had access to military-grade weapons and armor. "This is too easy," Kral muttered as he strapped on a captured weapon harness. "Where are rest of guards?" "Celebrating," replied Mora, the insect-like prisoner who had become their intelligence specialist. "Today is Vorthak Victory Day. Most guards are in main hall, drinking and watching propaganda broadcasts." Taemin smiled grimly. The Vorthak celebrated their military victories with the same enthusiasm they showed for conquest. It was one of the few weaknesses he had observed in their culture. Perfect. Phase 2 begins now. Phase 2 was the real test. Taking the armory was just the beginning. Now they had to capture the prison's command center, disable the orbital, defense platforms, and somehow get access to the Vorthak fleet. They split into 3 groups. Kral led one team to secure the vehicle bays and landing platforms. Vix took another team to take control of the communication systems. Taemin led the assault on the command center. The command center was built into the most heavily defended part of the prison. Under normal circumstances, it would have been impossible to reach. But these weren't normal circumstances. Half the guards were drunk on Vorthak victory wine. The other half were dealing with what they thought were random equipment failures throughout the prison. None of them suspected a coordinated assault led by a human they had never bothered to learn about. Taemin's team moved through maintenance tunnels and service corridors, following routes mapped by Nefri engineers during months of careful reconnaissance. They wore stolen guard uniforms and carried authorization codes hacked from the prison's computer systems. When they finally reached the command center, they looked like a routine maintenance crew responding to system failures. The deception lasted exactly long enough for them to get inside. "What are you doing here?" demanded the duty officer, a particularly ugly Vorthak with scars covering half his face. "Routine maintenance," Taemin replied in perfect Vorthak. "System failures in Section 7 require manual reset." The duty officer squinted at them suspiciously. Something was wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. That moment of confusion was all they needed. The HFY mystic hit the duty officer with a mental attack that left him staggering. Kalani warriors disabled the other guards before they could reach their weapons. Nefri engineers immediately began working on the command systems. In less than 5 minutes, they had control of the entire prison. "All teams, this is Taemin," he broadcast on the now captured communication system. Phase 2 complete. Beginning Phase 3. Phase 3 was the most dangerous part of the plan. They had to capture ships from the Vorthak fleet without triggering an orbital bombardment that would kill everyone on the planet. The solution was typically human. Instead of trying to fight the fleet, they convinced it to come to them, using The prison's communication systems. They broadcast a fake distress signal. According to their message, the prison was under attack by unknown aliens using advanced stealth technology. They needed immediate support from the fleet. Will this actually work? Vix asked as they monitored the fleet's response. Vorthak are warriors, not thinkers, Taemin replied. They hear unknown aliens with advanced technology, and they want to capture it for themselves. He was right. Within an hour, 3 Vorthak ships had landed at the prison's main spaceport to investigate the attack. Their crews were expecting to find evidence of new enemy technology. Instead, they found 50,000 angry prisoners armed with stolen weapons and led by someone who had spent 10 years learning how to fight the Vorthak Empire. The Battle for the spaceport was brutal but brief. The Vorthak ship's crews were elite soldiers, but they were outnumbered 50-1 by prisoners who had nothing left to lose. Taemin personally led the assault on the flagship. As he fought his way through corridors filled with smoke and energy blasts, he thought about the Horizon's Edge and his crew members who had died 10 years ago. This was for them. This was for Earth. This was for every world the Vorthak had conquered, and every species they had enslaved. The ship's captain was waiting for him on the bridge. The Vorthak officer was almost 3 meters tall and covered in battle armor. He carried weapons that could have cut Taemin in half. "You are the human who leads this rebellion," the captain growled. "I will enjoy killing you slowly." "Get in line," Taemin replied, raising his stolen weapon. The fight was everything 10 years of training had prepared him for. Taemin couldn't match the Vorthak's strength or reach, but he was faster and smarter. He used the ship's own equipment against his opponent, turning the bridge into a battlefield where size and strength mattered less than tactics and determination. When it was over, the Vorthak captain was dead, and Taemin was standing over his body, bleeding from a dozen wounds but still alive. "Bridge secured," he reported to his teams. "How are the other ships?" "Captured," Kral replied, his voice full of satisfaction. "All Vorthak crew dead or prisoner. Ships are ours." 3 ships. It wasn't much compared to the massive fleet orbiting the planet, but it was a start. "Vix, how long before the main fleet realizes what happened?" "Maybe 6 hours, the Nefri engineer replied. "I am broadcasting fake reports, but they will figure out truth eventually. 6 hours to get 50,000 prisoners off a planet and away from a fleet that could destroy them all with a single bombardment. Under normal circumstances, it would be impossible." But Taemin had spent 10 years learning that normal circumstances didn't apply when different species work together. "All team leaders, this is Taemin. We have 6 hours to evacuate everyone who wants to leave. Priority goes to technical specialists and volunteers for military service." "What about the others?" asked Mora. "The others can choose. Stay and hide until the Vorthak figure out how to restore order, or come with us and help fight for freedom." The response surprised even Taemin. Of the 50,000 prisoners on Kethmore, over 30,000 volunteered to join what they were already calling the Liberation Fleet. They loaded the ships with everyone they could carry, along with stolen weapons, supplies, and technical equipment. It was chaotic and desperate, but somehow it worked. As the last transport lifted off from Kethmore's surface, Taemin stood on the bridge of the captured flagship and looked down at the prison that had been his home for 10 years. "Where to now?" Vix asked. Taemin pulled up a star chart showing the local systems. Earth was marked as Sol 3, still months away, even at maximum speed. But there were other human colonies closer, and worlds that needed warning about the coming Vorthak expansion. Most importantly, there were other Vorthak installations that could be hit before the Empire realized what they were facing. "We're going to build an army," he told his alien allies. "And then we're going home." Behind them, Kethmore fell into the distance. Ahead of them lay the unknown challenges of fighting a war against the most powerful empire in the galaxy. But for the first time in 10 years, Captain Lee Taemin was free, and he was not alone. Admiral Park Ji-ho stood in the command center of Lunar Station Alpha, watching Earth burn in the distance. 6 months ago, he had been Captain Park Ji-ho, commanding a patrol cruiser on the Outer Rim. Now he was one of the highest-ranking officers, left in what remained of Earth's navy. The Vorthak invasion had been swift and devastating. Humanity's best ships had been destroyed in the first week. Earth's major cities were smoking ruins. The unified government operated from hidden bunkers, and billions of people were dead or enslaved. "Admiral," called Communications Officer Yoon. "Sung-ho, we're receiving another surrender demand from the Vorthak fleet." "Same response as always," Ji-ho replied without taking his eyes off Earth. "Tell them to go to hell." It was hopeless, and everyone knew it. Earth's remaining fleet consisted of maybe 200 ships, most of them damaged. The Vorthak had over 3,000 vessels in the Sol system, with more arriving every day. But surrender wasn't an option, not while human beings were still fighting and dying on the surface below. "Sir," interrupted Dr. Choi Hae-won, the fleet's chief science officer, "I'm detecting multiple hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Large ships. Definitely not ours." Ji-ho closed his eyes. "Another Vorthak reinforcement fleet, as if they didn't have enough problems already." "How many ships?" he asked. Analyzing now. "Sir, these readings don't match Vorthak signatures. The energy patterns are different. Multiple different patterns, actually, like a mixed fleet." Before Ji-ho could respond, every communication console in the command center started beeping. Someone was broadcasting on human emergency frequencies. "This is Captain Lee Tae-min of the Liberation Fleet, calling Admiral Park Ji-ho if he's still alive, requesting permission to engage enemy targets." The command center fell silent. Ji-ho stared at the communication console like it was a ghost. "That's impossible," Yoon Sung-ho whispered. "Tae-min died 10 years ago. I saw the reports." "Put him on screen," Ji-ho ordered. His voice was shaking. The main display flickered, then showed the bridge of an alien ship. Standing in the center, wearing a uniform Ji-ho didn't recognize, was his old friend Lee Tae-min. He looked older, harder, with scars on his face and hands. His hair was gray at the temples, and his eyes held a coldness that hadn't been there 10 years ago. But it was definitely him. "Hello, Ji-ho," Tae-min said, speaking in Korean. "Sorry I'm late." "Tae-min?" Ji-ho could barely speak. Where have you been?" "Prison. Learning. Building an army." Tae-min gestured to the alien beings visible on his bridge. "I brought some friends. We'd like to help with your Vorthak problem." Dr. Choi Hae-won was studying her sensor readings with amazement. "Admiral, I'm detecting over 800 ships in that fleet. Multiple species configurations. Some of them are Vorthak vessels, but they're broadcasting Liberation Fleet identification codes." 800 ships, Ji-ho repeated. "Tae-min, what exactly have you been doing for the last 10 years? "Surviving. And planning for this day." Tae-min's expression grew serious. "Ji-ho, we need to coordinate our attacks. The Vorthak main fleet is positioned to bombard Earth if they think they're losing. We have to hit them fast and hard before they can react." It was impossible. Tae-min had been declared dead a decade ago. But here he was, commanding an alien fleet and offering to save Earth from destruction. "What do you need from us?" Ji-ho asked. "Everything you've got. This is going to be the biggest space battle in human history." The Liberation Fleet that emerged from hyperspace was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Kalani dreadnoughts flew alongside Nefri stealth ships. Zeph-High carriers coordinated with human destroyers. Dozens of other species had sent ships and crews to fight under Tae-min's command. At the center of it all was the flagship Unity, a captured Vorthak battleship that Tae-min had renamed after the principle that held his diverse fleet together. "All ships. This is Admiral Tae-min," he broadcast to his fleet. The promotion had been unanimous among his alien allies. "You know the plan. Strike fast, strike hard, and show the galaxy that freedom is worth fighting for." The battle began with the Liberation Fleet's surprise attack on the Vorthak orbital platforms. Nefri engineers had spent months studying Vorthak technology, learning its weaknesses. They knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum damage. Kalani warriors led boarding parties onto Vorthak ships, their forearms and natural fighting ability, making them perfect for close combat in cramped corridors. Zeph-High mystics used their mental powers to confuse enemy crews and coordinate friendly forces across vast distances. But the key to the entire strategy was something uniquely human: the ability to adapt and improvise in the middle of battle. When the Vorthak fleet began reorganizing to counter the Liberation Fleet's tactics, Tae-min changed his approach. When enemy reinforcements arrived from an unexpected direction, he split his forces and attacked from 3 sides at once. "Human tactics are insane," complained Kral over the communication system. His ship was leading an assault on a Vorthak command vessel. "No species fights like this. That's why it works," Taman replied, watching the tactical display as his mixed-species fleet tore into the surprised Vorthak forces. "They don't know how to respond to chaos." Admiral Park Ji-ho commanded Earth's remaining ships from the bridge of the battleship Defiance. Fighting alongside his old friend felt like a dream. 10 years of grief and guilt were being washed away by the impossible reality of Taman's return. "Target their command ship," Ji-ho ordered his weapons officer. "Let's show them what Earth's Navy can do." The battle raged across the entire Sol system. Vorthak ships exploded in brilliant flashes of light, while Liberation Fleet vessels darted between asteroids and planetary defenses. Human pilots worked with alien crews, sharing tactics and covering each other's weaknesses. Dr. Choi Hai-wan coordinated the technical aspects of the battle from Lunar Station Alpha. Her voice, transmitted through ship AI systems, provided updates and analysis to both fleets. "Vorthak fleet is breaking up," she reported. "Their command structure is collapsing. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." But the battle's outcome wasn't decided by superior numbers or better technology. It was decided by something the Vorthak Empire had never encountered: a truly unified force of different species fighting for the same cause. When the Vorthak Supreme Commander ordered his fleet to begin bombarding Earth as a final act of spite, he found his orders being ignored. Kalani warriors had captured his communication systems. Nefri engineers had disabled his weapons. HFY mystics had turned his own crew against him. Taman appeared on the Supreme Commander's bridge like a ghost from the past. 10 years of imprisonment and warfare had transformed the human captain into something the Vorthak couldn't understand. "You destroyed my ship," Taman said calmly, walking toward the towering alien commander. "You killed my crew? You thought humans were weak." The Supreme Commander raised his weapon. "You are still just one weak human." "No," Taman replied. As Kalani warriors, Nefri engineers, and HFY mystics surrounded the enemy commander. "I'm not alone anymore." The final blow came not from alien weapons, but from a simple human combat knife. 10 years of training with different species had taught Taman many ways to fight, but in the end, he used the most basic tool of human warfare. When the Supreme Commander fell, the remaining Vorthak fleet surrendered. Standing on the bridge of the captured command ship, Taman looked out at Earth. The planet was damaged but not destroyed. Billions of humans were still alive. The war was far from over, but for the first time in months, there was hope. "Admiral!" Vix called from his station. "We're receiving surrender signals from all remaining Vorthak ships in the system." "Accept their surrender," Taman ordered. "Treat prisoners according to galactic law." Kral laughed. "Even now you show mercy to enemies. Very human." "It's what separates us from them," Taman replied. Admiral Park Ji-ho appeared on the communication screen. He was smiling, but there were tears in his eyes. "Welcome home, Taman," he said. "We missed you." Taman looked around his bridge at the alien beings who had become his family. Kalani warriors, Nefri engineers, HFY mystics, and representatives from dozens of other species. They had followed a human prisoner across the galaxy to fight for a world they had never seen. "I brought some friends," he told Ji-ho. "I hope you don't mind if they stay for dinner." As the Liberation Fleet established orbit around Earth, news of the victory spread across the galaxy. The Vorthak Empire, thought to be invincible, had been defeated by a coalition of former prisoners led by a human who refused to give up. It was the beginning of something new, something that had never existed before in galactic history. It was the beginning of true peace between species. The celebration lasted exactly 1 day. Admiral Lee Tae-min stood in the rebuilt command center of Lunar Station Alpha, looking at reports from across the galaxy. The victory at Earth had been just the beginning. Now came the hard part: fighting. A war against an empire that controlled thousands of worlds. "The Vorthak are regrouping," Dr. Choi Hai-wan reported, her holographic image flickering slightly. "Intelligence reports indicate they're pulling fleets back from the Outer Rim to protect core systems. That's good news for the Outer Worlds." Admiral Park Ji-ho said. Bad news for us. Taemin studied the tactical display showing Vorthak fleet movements. Red indicators showed enemy forces converging on the Sol system from 6 different directions. When they arrived, the Liberation fleet would be outnumbered 10-1. How long before they get here? He asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3, replied Vix, who had become the fleet's chief intelligence officer. They are bringing everything. This will be final battle. Kral's booming laughter echoed through the command center. Good. I am tired of fighting small battles. But Taemin wasn't laughing. He had spent 10 years learning about the Vorthak Empire. They didn't retreat. They didn't negotiate. When they committed everything to a battle, it meant they planned to win or die trying. The next 2 weeks were a blur of preparation. Ships from across the galaxy arrived to join the Liberation fleet. Former Vorthak prisoners brought intelligence about enemy tactics. Refugee fleets carried weapons and supplies. Most importantly, they brought hope. I never thought I would see Vorthak ships fleeing from battle, said Captain Nira, a Kalani officer whose world had been enslaved decades ago. You have given us something we thought was lost forever. Don't thank me yet, Taemin replied. We haven't won anything. We've just bought some time. The human captain walked through the corridors of the Unity, checking on his crew. They came from 40 different species, but they worked together like they had trained for years, which, in many cases, they had. In the engineering section, Nefri, technicians worked alongside human engineers to upgrade the ship's weapons. In the medical bay, HFY healers treated injuries using techniques from across the galaxy. On the training decks, Kalani warriors sparred with human marines. It was everything Taemin had dreamed of during his darkest days in prison. Different species learning from each other, fighting for each other, becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. Sir, Communications Officer Yoon Sung-ho called over the ship's intercom. The Vorthak fleet has arrived at the edge of the system. Taemin made his way to the bridge. Through the main viewing window, he could see distant flashes of light as the massive enemy fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Fleet composition? He asked. 12,000 ships, Dr. Choi Hai-wan reported, including their largest dreadnoughts. They're not taking any chances this time. Taemin's Liberation fleet had grown to nearly 3,000 ships, but they were still outnumbered 4-1. Worse, the Vorthak had learned from their defeat. This time, they wouldn't be caught by surprise. All ship commanders, this is Admiral Taemin, he broadcast to his fleet. You see the odds. Anyone who wants to leave now can do so with honor. This isn't your fight. The response was immediate and unanimous. Not a single ship left the formation. You insult us, human, came Kral's voice over the communication system. We did not follow you across galaxy to run from final battle. Besides, added Vix, where would we go? Vorthak Empire must be stopped here, or it will never be stopped. The unnamed HFY mystic's thoughts touched every mind in the fleet. We fight not just for Earth, but for all worlds, for all species, for freedom itself. Taemin felt something he hadn't experienced since the destruction of the Horizon's Edge 10 years ago. He felt like he was part of something larger than himself, something worth dying for. The Vorthak fleet advanced slowly, confident in their overwhelming numbers. They had learned from their previous defeat. This time they wouldn't allow the Liberation fleet to use surprise tactics or hit-and-run attacks. But Taemin had learned something too. He had learned that when different species worked together, they could achieve impossible things. Phase 1, he ordered. All Nefri ships execute blackout protocol. Across the Liberation fleet, Nefri stealth ships vanished from sensors. They had been working for months on new cloaking technology, combining Nefri engineering with techniques learned from other species. The Vorthak fleet suddenly found themselves blind, unable to track half of the enemy forces. Phase 2, Kalani assault ships execute honor strike. The Kalani dreadnoughts charged directly at the center of the Vorthak formation. It looked like a suicide attack, exactly the kind of direct assault the Kalani were famous for, but it was also a distraction. While the Vorthak focused on the obvious threat, cloaked Nefri ships attacked their flanks. HFY carriers launched fighter squadrons that seemed to appear from empty space. Human destroyers darted between enemy lines, targeting command ships with precision strikes. They're adapting faster than expected, Vix reported. Vorthak commanders are starting to coordinate defensive responses. Then it's time for Phase 3, Taman said, something they definitely won't expect. Phase 3 was the most dangerous part of the plan. It required Taman to leave his flagship and lead a boarding assault on the Vorthak command vessel. This is insane, Dr. Choi Hai-wan protested when she learned about the plan. You're the fleet commander. You can't risk yourself on a boarding action. I'm not just the fleet commander, Tae-min replied as he checked his weapons and armor. I'm the human who spent 10 years learning how to fight the Vorthak Empire. No one else knows their ships like I do. The assault team that boarded the transport, with Tae-min, represented everything the Liberation Fleet had become. Kalani warriors, Nefri engineers, Zeph-Hai mystics, human marines, and representatives from a dozen other species. They flew through the chaos of the space battle in a captured Vorthak transport using enemy identification codes to get close to the command ship. When the Vorthak finally realized what was happening, it was too late. The boarding action was brutal. Vorthak soldiers were elite warriors, trained from birth for combat. But they had never faced anything like Tae-min's multi-species assault team. Kalani warriors smashed through defensive barriers while Nefri engineers disabled security systems. Zeph-Hai mystics confused enemy troops with mental attacks, while human marines provided tactical coordination. At the center of it all was Tae-min himself, fighting with weapons from 6 different species and tactics learned from a decade of survival. The battle for the command ship's bridge lasted 3 hours. When the smoke cleared, Tae-min stood over the body of the Vorthak fleet commander, covered in blood but still alive. All Vorthak ships, this is Admiral Lee Tae-min of the Liberation Fleet. He broadcast on enemy frequencies. Your fleet commander is dead. Your command ship is captured. Surrender now and your crews will be treated according to galactic law. The response was not what he expected. Instead of surrendering, the Vorthak fleet began activating their self-destruct systems. They would rather die than admit defeat. They're going to blow up their own ships, Vix reported. All of them. The explosions will destroy everything in the system, including Earth. Tae-min closed his eyes. After everything they had accomplished, after 10 years of planning and fighting, it was going to end with the Vorthak taking everyone down with them. But then the Zeph-Hai mystic spoke directly into his mind. There is another way, but it requires trust, complete trust between all species. What do you mean? Zeph-Hai mental abilities can disable Vorthak self-destruct systems, but only if every mind in your fleet works together. Human, Kalani, Nefri, all others. One purpose, one will. It was impossible. Different species couldn't share consciousness. Their brains worked in completely different ways, but Tae-min had spent 10 years learning that impossible things became possible when people worked together. Do it, he ordered. What happened next had never occurred before in galactic history. Guided by Zeph-Hai mystics, the minds of 3,000 different crews from 40 different species linked together in a single moment of shared purpose. Human determination combined with Kalani courage. Nefri logic merged with Zeph-Hai wisdom. Dozens of other species added their own unique strengths to the mental network. The psychic wave that resulted was so powerful it reached across the entire star system, touching every Vorthak ship simultaneously. Self-destruct systems shut down, weapons powered off. For the first time in their empire's history, the Vorthak felt fear. When it was over, 12,000 enemy ships floated powerless in space, their crews too shocked to resist. The Vorthak Empire, which had dominated the galaxy for centuries, had been defeated not by superior weapons or numbers, but by something they couldn't understand: unity between different species. Admiral Lee Tae-min stood on the bridge of the captured command ship, looking out at the largest space battle in galactic history. Around him, his alien allies were celebrating, but he felt only exhaustion. 10 years of imprisonment had led to this moment. The destruction of the horizon's edge had ultimately saved not just Earth, but countless worlds across the galaxy. Admiral, Park Ji-ho called from the communication console. We're receiving surrender signals from the entire Vorthak fleet.